to breaking news right now. In a trial we've been following out of Texas, 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony has been found guilty in a fatal stabbing of a rival athlete at a track meet.
April 2nd, 2025. Frisco, Texas. 10 a.m. David Kuykendall Stadium, located on Stadium Lane in Frisco, was supposed to be filled with the sound of starting pistols, track spikes hitting the ground, and coaches shouting splits from the sidelines. That morning it was hosting the UIL District 11-5A Championship Track and Field Meet, one of the biggest high school athletic events on the North Texas calendar. 7 Frisco ISD schools had sent their athletes. Memorial, Centennial, Frisco, Emerson, Heritage, Independence, Lebanon Trail, and Liberty. Hundreds of students, coaches, and families packed into one stadium for a single day of competition. Then the weather changed. Heavy rain and thunderstorms rolled in over Collin County, forcing officials to pause the meet. Athletes scattered. Some moved to the bleachers, some took cover under team tents lining the infield. Coaches tried to keep their groups together. Parents watched from the stands. Everything stopped and everyone waited. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. By the time the rain slowed down, one 17-year-old was on the ground, his twin brother pressing on a wound trying to keep him alive. Another teenager was being put in handcuffs, and a championship track meet had just become a crime scene. 2 teenagers. A stadium full of witnesses. 30 seconds. The question that would take over a year to answer in a courtroom is the same one that still stops people cold. How does it come to that? Welcome to Headlines Uncovered. This channel covers true crime the way it deserves to be covered. Full facts, full story, no spin. Before we go any further, this case involves the death of a teenager. So that is your content warning. If you are new here, subscribe now and turn on notifications.
Unsolved. Mystery. Truth. Headline Uncovered.
Before anything else, you need to know who these 2 young men were. Not just their names. Who they actually were, because that context matters. Austin Matthew Metcalf was born on July 31, 2007, in Frisco, Texas. By the spring of 2025 he was a junior at Frisco Memorial High School, a dual-sport athlete competing in both football and track and field. On the football field, Austin played linebacker. He was voted team MVP by both his players and his coaches during the fall season. His father Jeff described him plainly, an honor student, a natural leader, a talented athlete. Austin carried a 3.97 GPA and had plans to attend college. College football programs had already taken notice. His mother Megan Metcalf said he was the most amazing kid she had ever known, smart, driven, focused on his future. Austin had a twin brother, Hunter, who also played football at Memorial. Austin played inside linebacker. Hunter played outside. The 2 brothers had grown up hunting and fishing with their father Jeff, and football had been the centerpiece of both their lives for as long as anyone could remember. Austin was not just Hunter's twin brother, he was his closest friend. They were at that track meet together on April 2nd, competing side by side the same way they did everything. In the days before the track meet, Austin had posted on social media about his faith. That post would eventually be viewed over 2.5 million times, most of those views coming after he was gone. Now for the other side of this story. Karmelo Anthony was also born in 2007, May 10th, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was the oldest of 4 children. His father, Drew Anthony, worked as a finance manager at a car dealership. His mother, Kayla Hayes, was a stay-at-home mom. The family relocated from Baton Rouge to North Texas in 2021, looking for better opportunities for their children. By April 2025, Karmelo was a senior at Frisco Centennial High School, just 5 miles from Memorial. He held a 3.7 GPA and was captain of both the football and track and field teams at Centennial. Outside of school, he had worked at Foot Locker for 2 years and held a second job at the H-E-B supermarket chain. He had no criminal record of any kind. He was weeks away from graduation. He was, by every measurable standard, a kid on the right track. 2 athletes, 2 schools, 2 futures, and not a single shared history between them. Hunter Metcalf confirmed it clearly after the stabbing. He had never met Karmelo Anthony in his life. Neither had Austin. That Wednesday morning at Kuykendall Stadium was the first and only time their paths ever crossed. Here is what the evidence and witness testimony established about what happened inside that stadium on the morning of April 2, 2025. When the rain hit, Centennial's track coach instructed his team to leave the track. The Centennial team did not have its own tent at the meet that day. Athletes from multiple schools spread out across the stadium, taking shelter wherever they could find it. Some went under team tents. Some sat in the bleachers. The entire area became crowded and disorganized fast. The memorial tent had roughly 20 people under it when the confrontation happened, a mix of boys and girls, mostly memorial students. Karmelo Anthony made his way to that tent. The defense would later argue he knew at least one person seated there, a memorial student who was a former boyfriend of a family friend, and that he had gone over to say hello. Multiple student witnesses told a different story. One 16-year-old memorial student testified that he heard Anthony say, "I'm not leaving, you all," after being asked to leave the school's tent. He said Anthony called the students a group of names and told them they were not going to do nothing about it. Another witness testified that Anthony was asked to leave the tent as many as 15 times before the situation turned physical. A 17-year-old memorial student testified that nobody in the tent knew who Anthony was, and that as a guest at another school's tent, he was supposed to be on the other side of the stadium. That witness also told the court he had the clear impression that Anthony was deliberately trying to provoke Austin Metcalf. Austin stepped in. Hunter Metcalf recounted exactly what he heard. His brother looked at Anthony and said, "You need to move." Anthony's response was 3 words, "Make me move." What happened next took seconds. According to the probable cause affidavit, Anthony told Metcalf, "Touch me and see what happens." When Austin put his hand on Anthony's shoulder, Anthony reached into his backpack and pulled out a knife. The witness described it plainly. Nobody at a track meet expects to see what happened next. Austin Metcalf was stabbed once, in the chest. His last words, presented by the prosecution at trial, were 4 words, "I've been stabbed." A football coach who was helping at the track meet testified that he immediately applied pressure to the wound. Memorial's athletic trainer performed CPR until paramedics arrived. Memorial's head track coach Robert Starr testified through emotion that he knew Austin was gone. Hunter was right there the whole time, doing everything he could. There was nothing anyone could do. Witnesses at the scene pointed Anthony out to a school resource officer who was the first law enforcement officer to arrive. The officer located Anthony at the north end of the track and ordered him to keep his hands up. Anthony was taken into custody within minutes. The stadium was immediately secured. Every school in the district sent its students home. Jeff Metcalf spoke publicly shortly after and asked the question directly, how did a knife get into a school athletic event, and where was the security? Frisco ISD never gave him a direct answer. Within hours of Austin Metcalf's death on April 2, 2025, Karmelo Anthony was processed at the Frisco City Jail and then transferred to the Collin County Jail in Kinney, Texas. He was charged with felony first-degree murder. His initial bond was set at $1 million, the standard amount in Collin County for murder charges, according to prosecutors. NBC 5 Dallas Fort Worth. 2 weeks later, a Collin County judge reduced that bond to $250,000. As a condition of his release, Anthony was required to stay inside his parents' home, wear an ankle monitor at all times, and could only leave with the judge's direct approval. The judge who approved the reduced bond, Angela Tucker, is also black. She received threats following her decision. The backlash was immediate and it was loud. 3 days after his release, the Anthony family held a news conference. His mother, Kayla Hayes, addressed the public directly, saying the family did not understand why they were being targeted and discriminated against before a fair trial had even taken place. Jeff Metcalf arrived at that same press conference. Organizers said he had not been invited, and he was later escorted out by police. The tension between the two families had become impossible to separate from the public spectacle surrounding the case. A GoFundMe page began circulating online, falsely claiming to raise money for Anthony's legal defense. His family publicly stated they had nothing to do with it and that misinformation about the case was spreading rapidly. AI-generated content, fabricated quotes, and doxing attempts targeting people connected to both families added more chaos to an already volatile situation. The case had become a national flashpoint, and at the center of it was race. Anthony is black. Metcalf was white. Social media amplified that detail relentlessly, with millions of posts framing the case almost entirely through that lens. Both legal teams were clear throughout the proceedings that race played no part in what happened under that tent. But the internet had already drawn its own conclusions, and no amount of clarification was going to change that for everyone watching. By the time the trial date was set, Judge John Roach had issued a gag order restricting what those involved could say publicly, and barred all electronics from the courtroom. On June 24, 2025, a Collin County grand jury formally indicted Anthony on 1 count of first-degree murder. The case was heading to trial. And after over a year of noise, protests, threats, and misinformation, a jury would finally have to sort through what actually happened. The trial of Karmelo Anthony began on June 4, 2026, at the Collin County Courthouse in Kinney, Texas, before Judge John Roach Jr. of the 296th District Court. Jury selection had taken place starting June 1. The final 12-person jury was drawn from a pool of more than 500 potential jurors. Notably, no black jurors were seated on the panel. That detail did not go unnoticed and would later factor into the appeal arguments filed by Anthony's team. The trial was presided over by three central figures. On the prosecution side sat Collin County 1st Assistant District Attorney Bill Werski, joined by a second attorney on the state's team. On the defense side sat Mike Howard and Toby Shook, two experienced Texas defense attorneys who had known each other and Werski personally for years. Werski later acknowledged it was a strange experience. He and Shook normally spoke every morning, but the trial put them on opposite sides of the courtroom for the first time. The prosecution built its case over 3 days of testimony before resting. The state called 21 witnesses in total, including student eyewitnesses from Memorial High School, first responders who arrived at the scene, and Collin County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Elizabeth Ventura, who testified about the nature of the fatal wound. Dr. Ventura described a 2-inch stab wound to Austin Metcalf's heart. The knife, a 5-inch folding pocket knife, was shown to the jury. It had been recovered in the bleachers after the stabbing. Werski's approach throughout was deliberate and precise. His central argument was not about emotion, not about race, and not about the relationship between the two teenagers. It was about a single legal standard. Deadly force under Texas law must be immediately necessary to be legal. Werski told the jury plainly, "You do not get to me to shove with a stab, especially if you provoke the shove." He pointed out that Anthony had been asked to leave the tent repeatedly and chose to stay. He questioned why. At any point, Anthony did not simply walk away. The prosecution's word choices throughout were intentional, provoked and senseless appeared in their arguments again and again. Two people did not testify at trial, Karmelo Anthony himself, and Hunter Metcalf. Werski later explained that prosecutors made the deliberate decision not to put Hunter on the stand because of the emotional toll it would have taken on Austin's twin brother. It was a calculated choice that reflected how seriously the prosecution took its responsibility to the Metcalf family. The defense opened after the state rested. Mike Howard's approach was built around two main arguments. The first was that Anthony had every right to be under that tent, that track meets are social events, that athletes from different schools mix freely, and that Austin Metcalf had no legal authority to remove him. Howard told the jury that Metcalf had no legal right to eject Anthony from the memorial tent and no legal right to put his hands on him. He referred to Anthony throughout as Mello, his nickname, deliberately keeping the jury's view of his client human and grounded. The second argument was more legally specific. The defense called Anthony's track coach and a teammate, who both testified that mingling under other schools' tents during downtime was a normal, common practice at track meets, part of the organized chaos of those events. Howard also pushed the sudden passion theory, arguing that Anthony was overwhelmed in the moment, acted without time to think, and that this should reduce the classification of his culpability under Texas law. If the jury accepted sudden passion, the sentencing range would drop dramatically from the 5 to 9 to 9-year range for murder down to a maximum of 20 years. Anthony did not take the stand. He admitted to the stabbing. The only legal question the jury had to answer was whether it was justified. During closing arguments, Judge Roach instructed the jury that in addition to murder, they could also consider the lesser charge of manslaughter, defined under Texas law as recklessly causing another person's death, rather than intentionally or knowingly doing so. That instruction gave the jury 3 possible paths: not guilty, manslaughter, or murder. After 4 days of testimony, 2 sides of a hard-fought legal battle, and one of the most publicly scrutinized cases in Collin County history, 12 jurors walked into deliberations to make their decision. We are seconds away from the verdict. Before we get there, if this breakdown has been valuable to you, subscribe to Headlines Uncovered right now. This channel goes this deep on every single case we cover. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and do not miss the next one. We will be back shortly with the verdict. The jury began deliberating at midday on Tuesday, June 9, 2026. Before they were sent out, Judge John Roach warned the courtroom clearly: there would be no outbursts. Anyone who made one would be held in contempt of court. Both families were in the room. The Metcalf family sat on one side. Austin's father Jeff patted his son Hunter on the shoulder. Several students who had gone to school with Austin were already crying. On the other side of the courtroom, Anthony's parents were doubled over in their chairs. His mother was weeping. His grandmother stood and wiped her eyes with a tissue. Nobody was talking to each other. 3 hours after deliberations began, the jury returned a verdict. Judge Roach read it from the bench. Guilty of murder. Jurors had been given the option of the lesser charge of manslaughter. They did not take it. The distinction under Texas law was clear. Manslaughter requires a finding that the defendant recklessly caused a death, while murder requires that they intentionally or knowingly caused it. This jury decided Anthony knew exactly what he was doing. After the verdict was read, Anthony was remanded immediately into the custody of the Collin County Sheriff's Office. He was taken out of the courtroom and processed. When he was brought back in for the sentencing phase that same afternoon, he could be seen crying. Under Texas law, a defendant convicted of murder has the right to choose whether a judge or a jury determines their sentence. Anthony had made that election before trial. He wanted the jury to decide. That decision now meant the same 12 people who had just found him guilty would decide how many years of his life he would spend in prison. The range they were working with ran from 5 years at the low end to 99 years or life at the high end. The sentencing phase opened the same afternoon. Both sides waived their right to opening statements. The prosecution chose not to call any witnesses. The defense called one, Anthony's mother, Kayla Hayes. She took the stand and addressed the jury directly. She told them that Anthony was her oldest child, her firstborn, and that he would always be her baby. She said she loved him very much. When the defense asked her directly whether her son regretted what he had done, she answered without hesitation, yes, he was very sorry. Anthony himself waived his right to testify during the punishment phase. He sat at the defense table in silence while his mother spoke for him. The jury now had everything it needed. The question of guilt was settled. The only thing left was the number. Before the jury went back to deliberate on punishment, both sides had one final opportunity to address them. The prosecution went last. Bill Werski stood and told the jury what he believed the evidence demanded. He told them that sudden passion did not apply to this case or this set of facts. He reminded them that by definition, sudden passion requires a finding that the conduct was directly caused by provocation from the person who was killed, and that it cannot apply when the person claiming it was the one doing the provoking. He then put a photograph in front of the jury, an image from the previous year's Frisco ISD track meet, showing coaches praying over Austin Metcalf on the track. He reminded them that Austin never made it to graduation. He never got to take the next step that every 17-year-old athlete competing that April morning was working toward. Werski told the jury that life sentences had already been handed down in this case, referring to the permanent weight now carried by Austin's family. He said only a lengthy prison term was appropriate, and he asked them directly to do their duty. His final words to the jury were 8. Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. Defense attorney Mike Howard addressed the jury before Werski. He told them he respected their verdict and respected their role. He acknowledged the weight of what they were being asked to decide. He made a final appeal for leniency, asking them to factor in Anthony's age at the time, his background, and the argument that this was not a premeditated act but a terrified reaction. The jury had already rejected that framing on the question of guilt. Now they would decide whether it had any bearing on punishment. Jurors deliberated for approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes before returning with a sentence. 35 years. The jury had rejected the sudden passion argument entirely. Anthony will be eligible for parole after serving half of his sentence, roughly 17.5 years from the date of his conviction. He was 19 years old when the verdict was read. Once the sentence was formally entered, the courtroom shifted one final time. After the sentencing verdict was read, jurors were dismissed and the Metcalf family was given the opportunity to deliver victim impact statements. They addressed Anthony directly. Austin's mother, Megan Metcalf, spoke to Anthony and told him that he may have just been handed a 35-year sentence, and that he should feel lucky, because she had been sentenced to a life without her son. Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis stood outside the courthouse afterward, flanked by Hunter Metcalf on one side and Jeff Metcalf on the other, with Megan holding Hunter's arm. Willis said that justice had been served. He said the process had delivered accountability. He praised the jury, the prosecutors, the investigators, the victim advocates, and the Metcalf family for their patience through a case that had drawn attention far beyond Collin County. Werski added a final thought when he spoke after the verdict, that regardless of what the jury decided, plenty of life sentences had already been handed out in this case. He was talking about the Metcalf family. He was talking about Hunter. He was talking about every person in that stadium on April 2, 2025, who watched Austin Metcalf die and will carry that mourning with them for the rest of their lives. On the night of June 9, 2026, Karmelo Anthony spent his first night as a convicted murderer in the Collin County Jail in Kinney, Texas. He was held in isolation in the facility's infirmary. He had walked into that courthouse on bail with an ankle monitor and walked out in handcuffs. The contrast between those two moments could not have been sharper. The Collin County Sheriff's Office began processing his transfer early the following morning. The move was expedited. By Wednesday afternoon, June 10th, Anthony had been transferred to the Wallace Pack Unit, a medium-security Texas Department of Criminal Justice facility located near Navasota, in Grimes County, approximately 60 miles northwest of Houston. That is where he will begin serving his 35-year sentence. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice released a new booking photograph the same day. In it, Anthony is 19 years old, his head is shaved, and he is wearing a sleeveless prison tunic. It was the image that circulated across every news outlet by Thursday morning. Less than 24 hours after sentencing, Anthony's legal team made their next move. Defense attorney Mike Howard told media outlets that the team had given the court official notice of their intent to appeal, and that they believe there are several important issues for the appellate courts to consider. In a one-page document filed with the Collin County Court, Anthony stated he could not afford an attorney for the appeal and formally asked the court to appoint one for him. The grounds for that appeal are already taking shape. Dallas appellate attorney David Kuykendall, who has decades of experience handling Texas appeals and was not involved in the case, said the strongest arguments on appeal may have very little to do with the evidence the jury heard. Instead, they would focus on whether the trial itself was conducted correctly. Kuykendall identified three specific areas worth examining: whether venue in Collin County was proper, whether the jury selection process was handled correctly, and whether the jury was given the right legal instructions. On the jury selection question specifically, 3 black female prospective jurors were removed from the case by the prosecution before trial, with the stated reason being their occupations as teachers. The defense objected and argued those removals were racially motivated. That objection is now part of the record that an appellate court could review. A group of advocates who publicly supported Anthony's family also spoke outside the courthouse and claimed that video evidence they had reviewed did not match the testimony presented at trial, a claim that has not been independently verified but that could factor into the appeal arguments as they develop. Sources connected to the Metcalf family responded simply, "They are very happy with the 35-year sentence and they consider the verdict a victory." Hunter Metcalf has been living with this loss since April 2, 2025. He accepted Austin's posthumous diploma on his behalf at their graduation ceremony just days before the trial began. Months earlier, at Frisco Memorial's first home football game after the stabbing, Hunter had carried Austin's jersey over his shoulder during the coin toss. He has not stopped honoring his brother. He probably never will. Here is where this story stands as of today. 2 teenagers. Both 17 years old. Both student athletes. Both enrolled in Frisco ISD schools 5 miles apart. They had never spoken a word to each other before the morning of April 2, 2025. The entire confrontation that ended Austin Metcalf's life lasted under 30 seconds. And the legal process that followed lasted over 14 months. The jury answered the legal question. They rejected self-defense. They rejected manslaughter. They rejected sudden passion. They returned a verdict of murder and a sentence of 35 years. Karmelo Anthony is now 19 years old and sitting in a medium-security prison in Grimes County, Texas. He will be eligible for parole in roughly 17.5 years, when he is in his mid-30s. The appeal process has begun. It will take months, possibly years, to work through the courts. An appellate court will not re-examine what the jury heard. It will examine whether the trial was conducted correctly. The jury composition question, the venue question, and the jury instruction question are all on the table. That process will play out quietly, away from the cameras, far removed from the crowds that gathered outside the Collin County Courthouse. What the appeal cannot undo is the event itself. Frisco ISD released a statement after the conviction saying the community has carried the weight of this tragedy for more than a year and that their thoughts remain with the impacted families, friends, and classmates. What Frisco ISD still has not answered is the question Jeff Metcalf raised on the day his son died. How does a knife make it into a school athletic event attended by hundreds of students, and what specifically has changed since to make sure it cannot happen again? That question has received no direct public response. A 17-year-old is dead. His twin brother watched him die. His parents delivered victim impact statements in a courtroom. His mother told the man who killed her son that she had been sentenced to a life without him. The jury had 5 to 99 years to choose from. They landed on 35. Parole eligibility in roughly 17 years. Whether that number reflects justice, or whether it should have been higher, is something people are still debating across the country as of this week. That question belongs to you now. Drop your answer in the comments below. If this case stayed with you, share this video. Most people only know the headline, they do not know the full story the way you do now. And if you are not yet subscribed to Headlines Uncovered, do it right now. This channel goes this deep on every single case, every single week. The next case is already in production. You do not want to come in late on it.